The issue, as you started talking about, is are you forcing yourself into that quote unquote grind for a good reason? Right? Are you doing it because you know that is getting you to where you want to be, or producing the results you want, or are you doing it because you don't know what else to do, or you feel stuck? The thing with toughness is people talk about, oh, get up and grind and you just got to be tough and just put your head down and plow. It's like, yes, with qualifications, you need to do that in pursuit of something meaningful, not just to torture yourself and like as a pretext for calling yourself tough.
Hello, friends. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of the Mayn Idea podcast, where today I have the pleasure of sitting down with Greg Everett. A quick shout out to the sponsors, which you can see behind me, Bubs Naturals and AG1. These are staples in my daily health and wellness regimen. To check them out and get discounts on those products, please see the show notes or visit the website at www.maynideapodcast.com. If you want to see this show grow in 2024 and help me bring on more incredible guests, please take 30 seconds and leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. This helps tremendously with organic growth, which is one of my number one goals of this show. I want it to spread because people share it with other like-minded people that value strength and conditioning, human performance, and martial arts. To stay up to date on all things the show, visit www.maynideapodcast.com and join the subscriber email list. Greg Everett is the founder of Catalyst Athletics, which in my opinion is the single most valuable resource for Olympic weightlifting, as well as content around generating power and capability for sport. Greg has authored Olympic Weightlifting, a complete guide for athletes and coaches, as well as Tough, building true mental, physical, and emotional toughness for success and fulfillment, which you can see here, both of which are discussed in this episode. Greg is a multi-time national competitor in the tactical games and shot, produced, and edited an incredible film about Olympic weightlifting called American Weightlifting. I hope that you enjoy this episode as much as I did. Without further ado, Greg Everett. Well, Greg Everett, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. You've been top of my list for many a months. I've done your programs, competed off your programs. You've worked with some of my favorite clients, athletes, and produced some of, in my eyes, the most valuable literature for the sport. So the fact that you took the time out of your day and your coaching schedule to be here really means a lot.
Oh, it's my pleasure, man. Thank you for having me.
A little bit of background here. There's going to be an intro, of course, but what is it that positions you as an authority when it comes to weightlifting as a sport and its applications to other areas outside of the sport, which I'm sure we'll talk to you down the line, like tactical training, survival skills, general life survival skills. What is it about your career and your accomplishments that places you in a position to speak on these things?
It's a great question because even at age almost 44, I still have some degree of imposter syndrome, every day of my life. So it's a tough question for me to answer. So the best I can do is that over the course of the last 20 years, as a coach and someone who is producing instructional content for other coaches, for athletes, I would say that I've consistently demonstrated I know what I'm talking about because I've been able to help so many other people achieve what they're trying to achieve, right? So rather than being successful in terms of selling a bunch of products or a bunch of services that may or may not be effective, I think that because I have unusually high retention and kind of rates of return for people coming back to my material, back to training programs, that sort of thing, I think it's a good demonstration that what I do is effective. And that to me is the standard anyway, is am I seeing measurable, demonstrable progress from the people who are using the things that I put out there for them? And if yes, then I'm doing a good job. And therefore I feel okay telling people they should trust me.
How do you deal with imposter syndrome? This is something, the more that I speak to people that at least I hold to high regards, people that are well versed in what they've done, that have dedicated lifetimes to their skill, whether it be in martial arts or in strength and conditioning. And the higher up you get the ladder of knowledge, the more humility you're exposed to, and the more that these people go, the more I know, the less I know, or the more I find out, the more I know I don't know. So how do
Right.
you handle that as someone who, I mean, you're constantly producing content, and I don't just mean that in like a TikTok way, right? Like you're not just rifling things off into the ether. These are well thought out. They are well reviewed. They are proficient from even a grammatical standpoint, right? I mean, you do take your time to put forth things that are durable, that will last. And you do it across all platforms, audio, video, literature, where I think most people run into roadblocks. They go, oh, I can't figure this out, or I need to outsource this. I got to get someone to put together my YouTube channel. I can't edit. I got to get someone to put this together. But the problem with that is that with every time that you outsource, you lose your touch, you lose your feel,
Yeah.
you lose your style, and that's what keeps it authentic and real, combined with your knowledge set. So how do you keep moving forward like that as an admitted imposter syndrome sufferer and keep trudging forward?
Uh, it's a good question, and I don't know that I have like a great system for it. So much as I just have kind of this natural compulsion to do these things. I mean, it goes back for years and years and years. I put my first book out when I was 20, and so there's always been things like that in my life. And so I think again, the way that I reassure myself is again how what I'm doing is received and used successfully by people. Seeing the continued progress and success of the athletes, the competitive athletes that I coach one on one, in addition to the ones that I kind of do less formally, like these online teams or people who just use my training programs, and I see, they contact me or they post about it, and I know the stuff is working. So that's how I reassure myself. Um, and the interesting thing, you bring up the stuff of doing everything myself, and so much of that goes back to my background and the way I started in all of this stuff, which was I had no choice, right? So you go
Yeah.
back 20 years, desktop publishing was barely a thing. Like print on demand books didn't really even exist until like maybe the early 2000s, where it kind of first started appearing on the market, and it was even beginning to be viable in any sense. um, Prior to that, it was difficult to get into something like publishing, to find the software, to know how to use the software, to understand how to work with, a traditional book printing company. How do you warehouse 2,000 plus books, just for one,
Right.
one book, minimum 2,000 units just to make it financially viable. These days you can literally download a free program, make a book on your desktop, send it to Amazon, have zero money up front, and you have a published book. So the landscape, just on that's just an example, that it's the landscape is completely different from when I started. And so back then I needed a website. Well, I don't have any money. I'm a 20-year-old kid, running a quote unquote business out of the kitchen of my $450 a month apartment. I better learn how to make a website, right? And so this was,
Right.
this is still pretty early internet time. So um, the amount of instruction out there was not as great as it is now, obviously, but you could pretty much learn how to do anything you needed, with regard to building websites, publishing, that sort of thing online, and that's what I did. And so I kept going that way, and that's how I was able to get so much done with such low overhead. It was a one man show for a long time, and I just prefer doing it that way. So, like you said, it's when you farm out work to other people, it's not just a matter of kind of losing the touch, the feel, the way you want things done, but you start tacking on more and more overhead to your process, and you move from a creator role to a management role. And I can't think of
Right.
a more horrible position to find myself in. It's like it's my worst nightmare. And I ran
Yeah.
gyms for a number of years, and having to manage employees and deal with that kind of stuff, it's just miserable to me. So yes, it's stressful. I'm in my office here pulling my hair out day to day, many hours, because there's so many different things going on. Um, but
Yeah.
it's such a small operation. The best analogy I ever got, I worked for an ambulance company years and years ago, and I forget what the point of this guy, this little his talk, but one of my supervisors was kind of making the analogy where you can have a giant ship and it's got all these amazing qualities that you can't replicate in a small boat, but the advantage of a small boat is that you have navigability. You can go anywhere, you can turn instantaneously, you can get to places the big ship can't go. And that's always kind of stuck with me because that's how I feel as a business owner and as a content creator. Is I want to be able to do exactly what I feel like doing at any given moment, not have to ask anybody's
Yeah.
permission, not have to find someone, hey, this idea I have in my head, can you translate that into a video or into a book? And yes, you can. Oh, well, actually, this looks terrible and I'm incredibly disappointed and now I'm
Right.
embarrassed to have my name on this thing. Like, I don't want to do that. We could, my
Yeah.
wife and I talk about it, periodically. We could make Catalyst Athletic this like juggernaut corporation and do all these things and hire
Right.
people, but it sounds terrible to me. I don't want to do it. I would much rather just work and have that enjoyment of completing these processes myself and knowing that what I'm putting out there is truly coming from me and represents me, and I can be proud of it, or I get to be disappointed in it because of something I did, not because I can't get an employee to
Right.
understand what I'm saying or get them interested or invested enough in it.
Well, you talk about it, and we'll get there in earnest in a moment about in tough, but this process oriented approach to things, I think, is a really beautiful way of capturing this. Like, if you're only focused on this end goal, right? Like, all you care about is getting the thing out to the public, or you just care about the website being built, but you're not involved in the minutia of it and the struggle of it, which, to be fair, is extremely parallel to weightlifting. I mean, how
Sure.
many hundreds of thousands of hours do you spend trying to add a kilo to a lift, right?
Yeah.
Like,
For
it is
6 seconds in
so in the
competition.
thick of it. Right, maybe, and maybe you get the flu that day and you don't even step on the platform. I mean,
Right.
it's all about the pursuit. Everything is the pursuit, and it's so evident in your work. But then, in preparation for this, I just kind of revisited Catalyst as a whole. So from the original book that I got, Olympic Weightlifting, to the website, to the free content that's available online, the YouTube presence, tough, and there's a connection between it all that you can't get when you start to let other people dabble. And it's not to say that there's not advantages, right? If you're trying to grow something, bringing on expertise and skill sets is great in some senses. But when they can't pull out of Greg Everett's brain and create the thing how you want it, there's a miss, and it's seamless across when you go through all your different avenues. So wherever someone comes into contact with Catalyst, they're going to get your understanding and best representation of the product. And that's because you're in the thick of it and you're okay with that. Has there ever been temptation for you? You mentioned you and your wife talking a little bit about, like, well, this could be kind of like a juggernaut. It could be a bigger system. What stops you, and how tempting is it to go, you know what, we've got the finances figured out on this thing. We could just outsource independent contractors. We could leverage this thing. We could blow it up. You obviously have the skill set. You guys have enough of the blueprint established where you understand your offerings and your brand and the ethos of the whole thing. Is that tempting to switch approaches and go that route?
Not terribly. So there are certain elements of that sort of move that are appealing. Um, the number
Mhm.
one would be freeing up time and energy, right? So that's the constant struggle for Amy and me is that we work all the time. And our
Yeah.
daughter's about to turn 22, and it's like life is whizzing by us at hyper speed, and we're kind of like, oh my god, and 5 more minutes and we're both going to be dead. Like, what are we doing here? So that it's the classic, lament of the working person is, where is my life going while I'm doing all this work? And does it make sense for me to be dedicating so much time and energy into this thing that ostensibly is its purpose is to allow me to enjoy life? So like, where's the enjoying life
Right.
part if all I'm doing is the work part in preparation for that? So that part of it is appealing, like being able to step back and not have to work so much, so consistently, so hard. That being said, it's not terribly appealing because I am very aware of the fact that, and you've touched on this, so much of the success of Catalyst Athletics is dependent on the nature of what we're putting out. In other words, because it is
Right.
reflective of me, of Amy, of kind of this, almost personal touch, like like a boutique business sort of feel versus a chain.
Yeah.
Once you change that into a large corporation with a bunch of staff, which with the business plans and all these different things, you lose that feel. And so my main
Hmm.
concern is, okay, well, we lose that feel, that means we lose the audience. So the audience we have, I think we have, and the reason they're so loyal is because of who we are, how we do things, and
Yeah.
why we do them. And the moment we step away from that, I don't know necessarily. We could certainly make the business grow and become bigger, but it would be different. It would be a completely different entity. It would be like, you know,
Yeah.
Ray Kroc buying McDonald's and taking it from this nice, cool little local hamburger shop and then turning it into this massive chain where now it's just garbage food, but they're just making money
Right.
hand over fist, right? So they're two completely different pursuits. And again, you alluded to this too, is the process, the pursuit versus the outcome. The outcomes are great. Like, we need the financial returns. Like, we want to be able to live comfortably, securely, and not have to be panicking about money like everybody else. But the
Right.
process is the pleasure, right? And so I talk about this in Tough, again, as you said. I'm just repeating things you said at this point. But when you think about like the most enjoyable periods of your life, invariably they are processes. They are the things that you are pursuing, and that sense of accomplishment and inspiration and motivation and enthusiasm. Comparing that to the outcome, which is this really brief, like ephemeral moment where you're like, "Yeah, I did it. Now
Yeah.
what?" It's like it's so fleeting.
Yeah.
Versus you look at that process and you're talking about weeks, months, years, lifetimes where you can enjoy this thing and derive satisfaction and gratification from it. So there's a lot going on with this, and I'm sure there's a part of it too. Again, is simply some degree of fear. Where am I going to lose my control of this thing that I've spent 20 years building and nurturing, and it is genuinely a part of me. And I'll say there have I've been approached, at points about selling Catalyst, and my initial reaction is absolutely not. You're crazy. Don't ever talk to me again, sort of thing. And the most
Right.
recent time, I was like, I should really just like stop and actually think about this. And I kind of like went through and thought about, well, what are all the benefits? What are all the drawbacks? And I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of benefits, but I'm like, I just can't. It's like selling your kid. You know what I mean? Where it's like you put
Yeah.
so much into something that is so representative of who you are, like genuinely is a part of your identity. So it's extremely difficult to even consider passing it off to someone else and having that name out there, like, oh, it's Catalyst Athletics, but man, it's kind of lame now. And
Right.
you're like, oh man, my legacy is
Well,
just
it's like
garbage now.
selling your kid, but your kid grew up to be a really good kid. Like
Yeah, yeah,
you
that
put
too.
all
Yeah,
this effort
the
and
kid that
time
you
into
actually love. Yes.
nurturing them. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not like selling a kid that sucks. It's
Right.
even I think back to my very first, and I'll even in a comparison here between another like valuable form of Olympic weightlifting content in all things gym and then everything that you put out at Catalyst. there were so many times where I'd be training, or I'm working with a client, or I'm training myself, and I'm like, I just need to see, I need to see the first phase of this lift. And so you can go, Catalyst Athletics. It's like, bams, weights get racked on the bar. You hear the clank, and it's 5 different people doing the movement exactly as it should. No words, no bells, no whistles. You can see exactly what it is that you need and get back to what you're doing. So it actually became this really instrumental tool in coaching and then learning, right? Because not everyone has direct access to someone like yourself. And this is before you had the online coaching offerings and stuff with all the different ways that we can do that now. And I just always kept thinking, I'm like, wow, this is such a good representation of something that's so complex but performed simply well, right? It's effective. You can revisit it. It's evergreen. It's evergreen today as it was then. And that's a nod to you and your wife's standard for quality. And that's the first thing that people start to lose when they give controls to someone else, is the quality of it. Because that person is going to want to push a different agenda than maybe you have. And so now, 20 years later, what would it look like if you had, cut those corners? Where would it be? What kind of kid would this have turned out to be? And I would imagine you guys probably have a very bought in, committed, interactive user base, which is exponentially harder to produce year over year with how many different billions of offerings there are for X, Y, and Z. And it's in a niche zone, right? Olympic weightlifting, like to get those people. I don't know if there's a way to like show the appreciation for the value, right?
Yeah, and it is interesting, and you look at the way I look at it is I would much rather have a comparatively small but very loyal, very appreciative audience that like people I like. Like the kind of
Yeah.
the kind of people I have in my audience, by and large, it's like I could probably go have a beer with these guys and like have a good time. Versus we just want more
Yeah.
bodies. You know what I mean? So if you break it
Right.
down, like the gym is a perfect analogy. So it's like we could have a massive team. Like we could literally have thousands of people on the Catalyst Athletics team. We turn down people left and right. Um, but
Right.
what we want is a team that is small. It's more of a kind of a family situation, and the number one criterion is, do we want to hang out with these people, right? So people are like,
Yeah.
how do I get on the team? It's like, I don't know. Are you cool? Or are you super lame and you just want to do weightlifting, or you just want to be associated with Catalyst
Right.
Athletics? Like, can we go hang out and I don't come home thinking, oh my God, I hope they quit, right? And so it's like that's
Right.
how I look at the content audience sort of thing. Is it's like my approach rubs some people the wrong way. I will absolutely admit that. But the way I look at it is, if I rub you the wrong way, you're not someone I want to rub. Like, bye. It's okay with me because I want
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
do things the way that I enjoy, that makes me happy. And I know that there are enough people out there who enjoy the way I do things for me to make a living. And that's what matters to me, not to just like get rich. I could probably get rich, as crazy as it sounds, on the sport of weightlifting if I chose to do things differently and make this massive business and make it all about business. But I want to make it about, again, we go
Right.
back to working so much that I can't enjoy my life. As much as I can make that work enjoyable and my interaction with the people involved enjoyable, that means I'm chipping away at that kind of maybe absence of life enjoyment to some degree. So I'm getting more out of it, out of the thing that I have to do anyway. So that's not
Right.
to say that I love every moment of my job. There's plenty of moments that I am like, completely, again, pulling my hair out and I feel like I'm drowning half the time.
Right.
But on balance, it's awesome. It's a hell of a lot better than any other job I
Right.
have or am qualified to do now.
Did you ever expect that you would be in a position via Olympic weightlifting, which again, to people that are probably listening and have never dabbled in it, is such a small, beautiful, strange art form in the world of strength training. Uh, that you would be in a position where you're actually even entertaining the idea that someone might want to buy what you created. When you're out
it's
here just helping people literally put more weight over their head. Like, was that something
yeah.
that 20-year-old Greg Everett was thinking about at all?
No, a 44-year-old Greg Everett hardly thinks about it. And that's through the years, I'll get contacted by people who are like, "Hey, I want to pay you for your time and do a consultation about how to, run my business." I'm like, "You don't want to do that with me." And let me just tell you right now, I'm the worst person to talk to. My business plan
Yeah.
has always been do really good work and then sit back and hope people find it and then like it enough to pay me. That's literally the whole thing. Every
Right.
once in a while, I'm like, oh, I should probably send out an email promoting something. That's about the extent of it. And very fortunately, it's worked out for me because I am absolutely inept when it comes to business and marketing and promotion. But I like it that way because I don't want to put my time and energy into those sorts of things. I know a lot of people really genuinely enjoy it. That's awesome. They'll probably make a lot more money
Yeah.
than me, but I'll have a good time, right? And again, as long as I'm making enough to support myself and my family and feel relatively secure financially, I'm okay with that. I don't feel compelled to push for more and more and more, to the point where I have to compromise, like you said, my ethos, my ideals, the approach that allows me to enjoy it as much as possible. It's not a fair trade-off to me. It's not worth it.
Yeah, it's interesting how, I mean, just like in weightlifting, to do something right, uh, it takes forever, and you're constantly in pursuit of perfection, knowing that you will never get it. You will not get it,
Yeah.
and there will be temptations to take shortcuts and do things the whole time, right?
Yep.
But if you can fall in love with that part of it, that's what the best lifters in the world, the people that I think are most wholesome, that have the head on their shoulders the best, they're all embodying that, because you're not caught up in the things that don't matter. And that, look, there's there's people that made that choice. They took the rich road, they sold whatever, and they're miserable. I know personally many
Yeah.
of them,
Oh
right?
yeah.
That are,
Yeah.
how that side of the coin looks, because you see it happen in people all the
That's
time, and
that's the
especially when you're
classic story.
in a business where
Yeah.
you coach luxury.
That
I
is the, that is the classic story where someone has everything, they're secure and financially and all these things, and they're absolutely miserable. They have no sense of meaning or purpose. They have no like genuine connections with other people, and they just kind of are floating through life trying to like financially scramble their way out of their own misery. Like, I'll buy a new boat. I'll
Yep.
replace my car every 6 months. And it's like, well, being able to do that would be pretty cool, but not if
Right.
you're trading that for the ability to enjoy what you do every single day of your life. That's a terrible trade.
And I think, like, in my heart, I've always, and I think it's one of the reasons I'm drawn and love martial arts so much, is I've always admired people that break that mold. I mean, you would fit in this, right? You've dedicated a massive portion of your life to Olympic weightlifting and becoming a master to the best of your abilities. And even someone humble like yourself, who might not say that out of your own mouth, it's true. And that's a unique type of person. But you do find it in these pockets. You find it in places where, I think of like my dad as an example, as a carpenter. He's been doing it his whole life. You don't meet that many people that have spent 40 years perfecting a
No,
skill, right? And it comes with
especially these
this
days.
wealth of knowledge that's intangible, especially these days.
Yeah,
And the temptations are even greater to step aside from that and pursue something that might be completely misaligned with who you really are.
right.
And people fall victim to it all the time.
Yeah, it's. I mean, what's the classic saying? Do something you love, and you'll never work a day in your life. It's not really true. You still
Right.
are going to be working, right?
That's
I'm
not
doing
true.
something I love. It's still work. There's days where it's brutal, where I'm just like, I don't know how many more years I can keep up this pace, this sort of thing. But again, I could be working that hard at a job that I hated everything about, right? I could be an accountant. I could be in
Dude.
You know, I could be an
Amen. Yeah.
advertising executive. Like, it would be awful. You know, I could still work as hard, make the same amount of money, but just be miserable every moment of my life. And there would truly be then no point to it. So I would much rather have those tough days, those tough times, those tough periods, you know, doing something that on balance I really do enjoy and allows me to, like, I feel like basically the luckiest guy alive because I essentially have absolute freedom. Like, I can do anything I
Right.
want with my business. I can work with whoever I want. I can turn away whoever I want. I can put out the exact content I want. Again, I don't have a board of directors I have to run things by. I don't have employees I have to ask to like make this thing work for me the way I want. Like, I have an idea. I want to do this. Okay, I don't know how to do that yet. All right, I'm going to figure out how to do this. Then I'm going to do it. Oh, it's terrible. Maybe I won't put that out yet. I'll figure out how to do it better and then do it again. Like, that's
Right.
basically my day-to-day life. And certainly there are things I've put out in the past 20 years where I look at now and I'm like, oof, that's a little rough. Wish I had taken more time on that one. But you know, that's true for anything. Like, if you haven't gotten
Yeah.
better at something or learned something in 15, 20 years, like, what are you doing in your life? Like, you know what I mean? Like, if you think everything you did 20 years ago is just as good as you thought it was back then, like, you're going nowhere.
And I think but that's what makes life real. Like, I never thought in a million years, if you told me 10 years ago, I would know as much as I know about audio and video production for podcasting. Never. I would have been like, you're high. There's absolutely no way I'll ever be interested in learning that.
Yeah.
Not that I love audio and video production, but becoming proficient in it and knowing that, like, wow, as a human, you can take a skill that you know nothing about, and with a little bit of interest and a willpower to, like, fail a bunch, you can do it. And then you're on the other side of it and you look back and you go, wow, like, this studio's lit the way it is from constant trial and error.
Yeah.
There's some like notch in the belt loop to that I think is really special. And you do see that in sports that are as grueling as something like weightlifting, where if you're ground down easily by things not going your way, good luck.
Terrible choice. Yeah. Well, and you know, it's an interesting point when you talk about, say, like the AV stuff or a sport,
Yep.
whatever the case is. People make the mistake of looking at individual pieces in there, like, oh, I'm not interested in that. I don't like that. I'm not motivated to do that.
Right.
Versus seeing those things as tools to build what you want,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you
Totally.
learned how to do audio and visual stuff so that you could create podcasts, not because you like making cool looking videos or great sound, but
Right.
because you wanted to use those tools in order to
Yeah.
put out content to help people, right? So you're using those things to achieve another end, some contribution you feel like making. And that's the same thing for me is, you know, I can build pretty incredible websites at this point. I would never want to do that for a living. I did it briefly as one of my
Right.
3 jobs at one time to make extra money, but wouldn't want to do it as a job. I wouldn't want to do a lot of the things I do individually as jobs themselves, but looked at, you know, holistically, these are the tools that allow me to have this career that I have, which otherwise, there's a reason that no one else does what I do. It's because it's been a lifetime of accumulating skills that previously were
Right.
essentially unrelated. Like, no one would ever think to put those things together. And I just happened to be a guy who collected skills because I liked learning new things and being kind of self-reliant and very independent. And it got me to where I am now, inadvertently, of course. I had no plan. You know, there wasn't some grand plan to put all these things together one day and become like the master Olympic weightlifting content creator. It's just kind of how
Right.
things fell into place. But I couldn't have taken advantage of the opportunities I did to get here had I not had so many of those skills in place already, right? You know, the reason I was able to
Yeah.
get so
And
far ahead of everybody is because I could write books, I could publish books, I could
right.
build websites that were functional in a way that out of the box or you know, hired out websites are not. Right? I've had quotes from people to rebuild my website, you know, like $50,000 to $75,000, and they
So
tell me they
ridiculous.
can't replicate the functionality. I'm like, why would I pay you anything for that? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. So it's like, you again, trying to not get too far afield here, going back to weightlifting or any sport really is, oh, I don't like doing ab work. I don't like doing my accessories. Well, no one really likes doing that stuff, but they see it as a
Right.
tool, in that building process to achieve what they truly do love, which is, big snatches and clean and jerks, or,
Right.
bench, squat, deadlift, or like whatever, good pitches in baseball. So those are all the pieces, the components, the tools that you use to get what you want, not the things directly that you necessarily enjoy. And I think that's what people just don't have the patience and the mindset for so commonly is, I don't want to do all those little things. Well, then you're not going to do the big thing because the big thing is made up of all those little
Right.
things.
And it's really impressive when you look back at just even at all the work you produced. Like, imagine if someone told you no. You're like, you know what?
Yeah.
I've been doing this tactical training. I have this wealth of knowledge around Olympic weightlifting. I think that I could put this together and I could create programs and information for people that maybe are passionate about these two things, but they don't know how to bring them together. And someone goes, no, no, Greg, that's misaligned with our values. We're an Olympic weightlifting thing. And you're like, oh, okay.
Right.
Oh, you know what? I
Yeah.
really want to tell the story of American weightlifting. I can film and I can edit and I could probably interview people. Ah, Greg, we don't do documentaries. We're Olympic weightlifting. Yeah, okay, okay. Like all
Yeah.
of these things, if you weren't grabbing this by the horns constantly with your wife, what gets made? A bunch of generic crap that like some people use for a little bit and they stop. Definitely not a diehard group of people that are there for literally everything that you put out. I mean, you could write a
Yeah.
book tomorrow about short poems that came to you while you were on the mats, and I'm going to be buying the book as well as many
Yeah.
other people. But it's that ability to say, to do what you want to do, to weigh those things out by yourself. I always joke like with friends whenever I'm out on a ski trip or something with them, and everyone's bringing their computers to do work, and I'm like, and my boss gave me the couple of days off today. It's like
Yeah.
that's
Did,
always a
did
joke
he?
because like I'm on the trip, so I'm not going to work. I'm my boss, so I'm not going to
Yeah.
do it right now. I'm going to do it when it fits. And you just see people stuck in these. Not that they're all bad, right? Some people are excelling like crazy, and they love what they do, and that's amazing.
Right.
But when you see someone who's wishing that it was another way around, it makes
Yeah.
me so grateful for people like yourself that are an example that like, hey, you can create this if you're willing to. And this, I think, it's a great part about the book. It's toughness in a sense. It's like you can gruel through this and you can persevere through it because you have the tenacity to get it done and you understand that it's not going to be instantaneous. And that's the crux that just ruins so many people, whether they're pursuing bigger numbers on a bar, a business endeavor, a side project that they want to start, is they get so ground down by the fact that things don't come right away.
Yeah. Well, and so much of it too, and go back to what you just said is there are people who genuinely love their jobs and, working 60, 70 hours a week, they don't dislike that. Like they enjoy that. And for them, then
Yeah.
that's a good choice. That makes sense. The issue, as you started talking about, is, are you forcing yourself into that quote unquote grind, um, for a good reason, right? Are you doing it because
Yeah.
you know that is getting you to where you want to be, or, producing the results you want, or are you doing it because you don't know what else to do, or you feel stuck? That's the difference, right? And so
Yeah.
the thing with toughness is people talk about, oh, get up and grind and you just got to be tough and just, put your head down and plow. It's like, yes, with qualifications, you need to do that in pursuit of something meaningful, not just
Right.
to torture yourself and like as a pretext for calling yourself tough, right? It's like, oh, I just beat the crap out of myself every day, and I'm just miserable. It's so tough of me. Like, no, at that point, that's just dumb, right? That's just kind
Yeah.
of self-flagellation because it's like, you're punishing yourself or something. That's not accomplishing anything. Like that hard work, that difficulty, that struggle, kind of that fear, that exhaustion, all these things, they have to be in place in pursuit of a meaningful goal. Otherwise, they are an absolute waste of your time and your energy, and you're just making yourself miserable for no reason. Why make yourself miserable to make someone else happy, right? Let me
That's
back
a
up on
question a
that
lot
level.
of people need to be.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
when I said that, meaning like in jobs or whatever, but there are some
Yeah.
people who are so selfless and so focused on helping other people and contributing to good things in the world that they will struggle and really gain nothing for themselves other than the gratification of helping other people. And that's awesome. So I don't want there to be a mistake. Like if that's your thing, then
Right.
absolutely I applaud you, and I wish I could be that awesome, but I'm not quite that selfless at this point yet. I'll reach nirvana on my deathbed, maybe.
Hopefully we all will. Uh, I knew. See, I knew that we could spend it. I knew we were going to spend like an hour talking about things that had absolutely nothing to do with weightlifting, which was, in essence, somewhat of my goal for this conversation because I look up so much to everything that you put out. I'm curious. Is there anything that still, at this point, surprises you about Olympic weightlifting?
Um, I don't know that anything surprises me so much because I've learned that it's so much of it is very unpredictable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think once you recognize that, it makes it a lot easier to navigate. So I think early on, a lot of people look at it very formulaically. Like if I input, X number of squats at Y percentage, I get, Z result. And no, you don't.
Right.
Some people are gonna that formula is gonna work out as predicted. For other people, it's gonna be absolutely terrible. And so once you recognize that and accept it, that you have to be very flexible. You have to expect to need to change things along the way, and to improvise and to experiment and to do all these things other than just like copying a training program out of a book or mimicking a single lifter's technical style. The process of suddenly you realize like, oh my god, this is so much more complicated than I really wanted it to be. But again, that's where the pleasure in the process comes from, because if it were a
Right.
formula, I wouldn't have a job, right?
Right.
I would be an accountant. I'd be stacking bricks on a pallet somewhere, something, miserable. But because it is so nuanced, it's so unpredictable, there is so much variation. That's where the fun of it is. But, of course, that's where the frustration of it is also. But without that
Right.
variability and unpredictability, it'd be kind of pointless, right?
What is it about Olympic weightlifting that is so special to you? This is such a it's an often confused genre of weightlifting. I think people that don't participate in it or haven't had exposure to it, whether that's via a couple exercises in a sports training program or an actual desire to compete on the platform, uh, people will think, oh, just weightlifting, but in the Olympics, right? So
Yeah.
there's so many different ways that people think of this. What is it that you find so beautiful about this sport? It's such a unique expression of power and strength and dedication. But what is it that just grabbed you 20 plus years ago and were like, hey, man, this is what you're going to do the rest of your life?
Yeah, well, I can't say I had a revelation that clear about it, but it was instantly appealing to me, definitely. And I think it took me many years to understand and be able to articulate it, but I think a big part of it is the fact that it's this remarkably complex, nuanced, extensive thing that fits into this very seemingly small, simple package, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
snatch, clean, jerk. Just, basically three movements, um, but you can spend a lifetime learning about them, perfecting them, never actually perfect them, and enjoying that process. And so you compare it to, say, something like baseball, where there's so many different moving parts. It's so complex, multiple, even
Right.
a single player, single position pitcher. There's so many different things going on, and so the complexity is very obvious. Everyone knows that's complicated to be able to throw, a slider or something.
Right.
But I remember vividly this woman coming into the gym years ago to one of our like introductory fitness classes, right? So this is like a middle-aged woman, bit overweight, zero athletic background. And I think on like day 2 of this class, she goes, I watched some Olympic weightlifting on YouTube last night, and I don't understand why I couldn't go to the Olympics in that sport. And there was just like this stunned silence in the room. And I had to like scramble to find a way to respond without being incredibly rude. And I was like, it's a little more complicated than it looks. So it's like, it was just this like funny experience that reminds you, like, to outside observers, it's hard to understand how difficult it
So
truly
hard.
is. And how many people have you heard like, weightlifting, it's just technique. It's just like this magic trick,
Totally.
like as if your technique is good enough, like the laws of physics don't apply to you anymore. You know what I mean? Like it's still 200 kilos. It doesn't just jump off the floor over your head for you. But I think what drew me to it, in addition to that, though, was the culture. And again, you have to go
Yeah.
back 20, 25 years to when I was first exposed to it. And it very much reminded me of kind of like the skateboard and the hardcore culture
Dude,
that I loved, because it was,
100%.
yeah, it's this garage sport, this
Yes.
low rent, no money, no recognition, DIY sort of affair. And so it was just like this perfect
Yes.
like melding of these worlds to me, where it's like I was always athletic. I loved being an athlete. I loved strength training and weightlifting generally. I loved skateboarding. I loved, BMX and trials, and I loved hardcore and all these different things. And I looked at it and I was like, man, it just all fits perfectly together. And of course now it's a little different. There are big gyms and everybody's got an Instagram
Right.
account, and there's full on camera crews behind like half the people at a national championships, and you're like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
But like it's still, when you really break it down, you remove that kind of like periphery, and you get down to that core, the really loyal long-term core. It's still the same as it always was, and I think always will be. And I think that's probably true for a lot of sports. Like boxing is a great example of that. Like how many like
Yeah.
just filthy, disgusting basement gyms are out there that are producing absolute monsters. And oftentimes
Yep.
names you'll never hear unless you're an incredibly like huge boxing fan. So the same thing. It was about the love of the sport versus, oh, I'm gonna go pro and make money, or I'm gonna get recognition, or, oh, girls are finally
Right.
gonna pay attention to me. It was like none of that. It was like, I like doing this because I like
They will
doing it,
not.
right? They will
Yeah.
absolutely not.
It's funny. The my client, well, your athlete, Jason, and
Okay.
Jason and I would come in to train him some days, and he would, in the middle of like you've been to an Equinox, like a very corporate luxury gym, he's just
Yeah.
shouting Shankle at me as I'm coming up the stairs with my clipboard, and I'm like, dude, Jason, we gotta like keep this
Yeah.
PC, right, for the
Right.
managers. But I think about that, and you hit it the nail on the head so hard. I'm really glad that you said that. There is something very skateboard about it. Like I grew up, same thing, skateboarding since I was like 9 years old. That was my whole friend group when I was a kid.
Yep.
Taking public transportation together to go get kicked out of some curb in front of some business. Some grumpy guy doesn't want us there. And when you watch, like, I mean, that classic clip of like John North and Donny Shankle training together, just shitty, like heavy metal music playing, two guys on an afternoon, nothing better to do, just progressively heavier and heavier weight. And this video just rolls, and there's no transitions. There's no audio. No one's there with a camera crew. It's not going
Right.
on someone's Instagram. It's like this very raw thing that when I talk to people about that video, it's kind of like how can you tell someone's going to be your best friend, right? You're like you mention this, and the way that they react about it is like, oh,
Yeah.
about this whole subculture that exists on not only just on the internet but in garages all over the country with people they're just trying to get better at something, and they're never going to be the best at it,
Right.
and they're never going to compete on a national scale. They're just war with the self, like that willingness to accept that you're going to war with yourself constantly to try to get better at something ultimately arbitrary, it just clicks with some people. And then
Yeah.
you, on the meet level, like you go and you do a meet and it's like people that are volunteering for this to help officiate and they're not getting paid for it. And you're sitting in like fold out wrestling chairs and someone built the platform 2 hours before. It's just, I don't know. Maybe it's that there's something very pure and real about it. And with social media, especially, things are so less real and pure the more that they spread and the more you come into contact with new things. But it's a very
Yeah,
special, cool.
it is. The purity is a good point. And you look at it, it's an individual sport. You can do it absolutely alone. But the odd thing too is that you can do it as part of a team, and you can be a part of this
Yeah,
community, which is really interesting to me because I was never a big team sports guy. Like I played all the team sports, but I didn't really
same.
enjoy them that much. The
Yeah,
individual sports was what I always gravitated to, but having that community or having a team is something I still loved also. So it's like I wanted the best of both worlds. And the thing with social media is it's such a double edged sword in every possible way, where in
yeah.
so many ways it really like dilutes things like that. But then I look at it the other way and I
Hmm.
think, well, but you look at someone who's training in their basement or in their garage and in the middle of nowhere like Iowa. There isn't another weightlifter or a coach for 500
Totally.
miles. They now have an opportunity to have that sense of community with someone else who's probably in a similar situation. So it's like it's a tool. It's one of those things where it can be so valuable in so many ways if you know how to use it to the best effect. And of course, that's individual too. Is what do you need it for? What purpose do you want it to serve? And then you just have to try your best. And it's really hard for me, but I try my best to ignore all the other parts of it and not let it get to me because that's like the most depressing thing on earth. Speaking of evergreen content, remember the days
Yeah,
where you
it's
could make content and then you just put it in a book or on a website and it was there and valuable forever. Man, now you make something and within 24 hours it's like it never existed. I'm like, oh, so I have to
yeah, it
remake this
gets
same
buried.
video once a year for the next 20 years. It makes no sense to me, but
But in a way, I
whatever.
mean, but here's the use case for the way that you've built your business, right? That may be true for social media, but because you've made your business recession proof, and to use the term,
Yeah.
uh, there's avenues where you put the material in a lot of different places. So yeah, maybe it gets buried on social media, but then it's in your forum or it's in a program or it's in a book. And so it again, it gives people this cycle where they can stay involved. And I think it's something that you do so well with Catalyst is I can still just go online and I can find, just like when I was training, these videos that are evergreen, that are there.
Yeah.
You put them out, you made them well, and they're available. And that kind of beats, they may go change the algorithm tomorrow and everyone's social media goes black and you can't see anything, right? Or they're down for maintenance for 3 months. Well, you got a website that you built and you're not beholden to anyone and
Yeah.
everything's there. Or you have a book that you put out that has everything that you need with very crystal clear photos. So I think it's another incentive to like take the risk on yourself and be willing to spend some time doing that in anything, whether it's weightlifting or growing a business, because then you are able 20 years later now to reap the rewards in so many different ways and connect
Yeah,
with people in so many different ways.
you definitely do things differently when you are looking at the big picture, the long term versus,
Hmm.
can I go out there this week and make a big splash on social media and get a billion followers on TikTok for doing a silly dance or whatever. Yeah,
Right.
maybe. And that might work out for you for a year or two, or maybe if you're lucky, 5 years. Um, there's a guy, Matt Foreman, who's an old friend, and he's written a lot of articles for Catalyst. I put out a couple of his books years ago,
Hmm.
and I would always, get mad over the years. Like some new thing would pop up, a new company or a new person putting out and getting all popular and like, what is this? This is ridiculous. Like this is garbage. It's nonsense. Like how are people following this? And he'd be like, just wait a couple years. They won't exist anymore. And he was right every single time. And so I look back now. I have the luxury of kind of of hindsight, of course, is I can look back and yeah, I'm still here. Like I'm still chugging away. I'm not obsolete yet. And as you said, I have this massive archive that isn't going anywhere. If my website crashes, I can put it on another server. You know what I mean? Like I have it all somewhere.
Right.
And so that's reassuring to me is that I might, at any given point, I'm not going to be the most popular. I'm not going to have the most followers. I'm not going to have the most, social media views, the best stats, but I'm going to be around for as long as I choose to be around. And in that much, I am now very confident after this many years. And I don't think a lot of people in that arena can say the same thing, or at least say it honestly.
It's just like you trained Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for a period of time, yeah?
Yeah.
So we see this happen a lot in Jiu-Jitsu. Is people come in and they're kind of flashier. They're coming from an athletic background and they go really hard for a little bit and then they quit. And sometimes the guys that are they're showing up every single week, maybe not the most athletic, maybe they're not the most talented, but they just keep showing up and they keep showing
Yeah.
up and they keep showing up. And now those people are really skilled and they
Yeah.
found a path of moving forward, that allows them to continue to show up. And now they're a problem. And the other person who had a completely different approach to it is nowhere to be found, or they're somewhere making up,
Right.
excuses for themselves as to why it is the way it is. And when you're willing to operate in that, think of the semi truck going up the hill, right? It's not like ripping up the thing at 4,000 RPMs going 70 miles an hour. It's just chugging, but it's also
Yeah.
not blowing its engine. And then it gets to the top. It's a different speed, but it takes a specific kind of person to be willing to risk themselves on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are the silent killers, those guys you're talking about. They're all sitting in the corner quietly, just kind of waiting to roll with you, and you come in there, with
Dangerous.
your brand new rash guard. You just got finished watching the last UFC, and they just tee off on you without breaking a sweat, and that they're talking to you the whole time. I used to roll with a guy named John Frankel. He's the first guy I worked with, and he was so funny because and he was so good at what he did. He would tell you exactly what he was going to do to you, and you still couldn't defend it, right? And to be fair, he was like a 80-time black belt, and I was a loser. But to see him be able to do, like, this is what I'm going to do right now, and you were just helpless to defend against it. But if you saw that guy out on the street, he's just this nice, friendly, like low-key guy, and those are the guys you got to watch out for, the ones
What
who are
was
willing to put in
I'm
that time.
curious because you don't strike me as someone to not see something through that you put your mind to. What led you to stop training jujitsu?
uh, it wasn't something that I was ever super into, to be honest. It was I got
Yep.
into it in a very roundabout way. I did a couple different martial arts when I was much younger, and um, it was a very coincidental sort of thing how I ended up with John. And then I trained with another guy, Marcelo Pereira, in Southern California for a while. But that was as I was recognizing that weightlifting was what I wanted to be fully committed to. And in order to do that, you can't be rolling around on mats with sweaty dudes all day long. Like it's really got to be one or
No.
the other if you want to be very serious. And so for me, weightlifting was the clear choice. And so fortunately, I didn't like BJJ enough that it was a difficult decision for me. It was like, yeah, it's kind of fun, it's cool, it'd be nice to be able to continue doing it, but it's not that big of a deal. And
Right.
I don't regret that. I don't really miss it. Especially now because I just it's one of those things like everything else. I'm just the curmudgeon is like as soon as something is super popular and fashionable, I'm like, I don't like
Oh,
it
you hate
anymore.
it
It's
even more.
stupid. And it would,
It's
not
funny.
not truly, but like that's kind of how I look at it. I'm like, God, man, like
Right.
this is just so goofy now in so many of the cases. But again, the guy sitting over there in the corner, just heads down, working away quietly. Um, that's the way to do it. Those are the guys who last and the guys who
You,
come out on top eventually.
I think that's an important thing, and this is definitely. I mean, I would put this in a characteristic of toughness is like knowing how to make that choice, because I can sit here and be someone who's like very much about jujitsu. It's a big part of my life and I love it. And on the other side, you made that choice that weightlifting was more important. I remember at a very similar point, I was like, I can't be training 6-day Olympic lifting sessions for competition and do this, because I was blowing my hip flexors out like every other day.
No.
And my choice was just the opposite. It was, I'm not going to have a career in Olympic weightlifting. I want to pursue this martial art and learn more about it. And I was very drawn towards it. So I went that route. But understanding that the two, as much as I would have loved them to coexist, they weren't lending themselves that well to each other.
Right.
I wonder, like from a coaching perspective, from someone who's shoulder to shoulder with high level athletes constantly, and also understands the demands of Olympic weightlifting, but the potential outcomes that you can get from being dedicated to it. When you look at sports like martial arts, like jiu-jitsu, your experience with that, you could throw striking, wrestling in here. Where does Olympic weightlifting sit for these types of sports? And what should people look to pull from it? Because I think a lot of times people can get stuck in the weeds. They go into it and it's overwhelming, right? It's a lot. There's a lot going on. And the skill set that you have to acquire to be moderately proficient is very dedicated. I mean, you really have to give yourself to this. So for people that are listening that are involved in martial arts in some capacity or wrestling, what should they look to Olympic weightlifting for? And what's that in time investment or interest like to really get something out of it?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that Olympic weightlifting has some benefit for essentially any ground-based sport, right? In any time you were in a sport that having powerful legs and hips and trunk or grip even is valuable, Olympic lifts are going to contribute to some extent. The trick lies in finding the balance between time and energy investment and how that impacts the resources, the very limited resources you have to train for your primary sport, the potential injury risk, or even not even injury so much as overuse, things like tendonitis and things like that you could potentially run into by adding this kind of stuff on top of your primary sport. But I think that it can be simplified and reduced in a way that pretty much anybody can figure out how to implement it to some degree. So even if that means literally doing nothing but power cleans once a week, that is going to give
Right.
you some kind of benefit, for jits, for wrestling, for boxing, anything. Um, and it is, some people are the type of athletes who pick up those skills very quickly, in which case, no brainer, figure out how to do some power cleans, maybe some power jerks or push presses, snatching, maybe if you think it's fun. I don't know that that's really probably the best use of time and energy for these athletes. And then for someone who maybe they've got bad wrists or bad elbows, or they have to be really careful about a shoulder or whatever, maybe you're not power cleaning. Maybe you're just doing some pulls, or maybe you're doing, a jumping back squat with relatively light weight, like 20% of your back squat or something like that, where you're training power like you would get from an Olympic lift, but in a really simplified way where the risk is very low and the learning curve is very flat, right? Um,
Right.
and I think even but it's the same as any sport, right? You can simplify the most complex things as much as needed to introduce them, and it just depends on, again, how complex do they need to get for you to benefit from them, versus how can you get the most benefit from the least amount of investment outside of your sport. um,
Right.
like so I just
Meaning that like if you're let's say you're a basketball player, you need to be playing basketball. That's what you really
yeah,
at the end of the day need
yeah,
to be doing, is taking shots, feeling defensive patterns, making runs, and getting the damn ball in the hoop. And people might
absolutely.
like to overcomplicate this all to be like, no, you need depth drop, reactive, single leg plyometrics, or you're going to have a non-contact injury. It's like, look, at the end of the day, you got to play the damn sport. If you're
Yeah,
only selecting from exercises, then you're never actually rolling, or you're never actually throwing a combo or sprawling or stuffing a takedown. Like, then where's the actual value? And that's actually confusing your efforts.
Well, and one of the really earliest important lessons I got in BJJ was to stop trying to power my way through everything, right? And
You
and
seem like you
so
would be good at that.
well, you have to be when
Yeah.
you're not skilled, right?
Yeah.
When
Right. No,
you're just like the big clod hopper who comes in there and is like, well, I'm
yeah.
just stronger than him, and it's like that can get you to a certain extent, but with a truly skilled guy, at rolling,
Yeah.
he's still going to tee off on you, and all you're going to do is be really out of breath and tired, while he's just giggling at you and you're tapping out. Um, but so in the same sense is going back to that basketball, jits, boxing, whatever, if your sport and the skills directly related to that sport is not the overwhelming majority of your focus and your time and energy investment, it's going to change the way you play, right? So you take a
Right.
jits guy, especially like a beginner intermediate, you overly focus on strength training or Olympic lifting, he's more than likely, or she more than likely, is going to tend to revert to relying on those abilities over the skill when they get into a bind,
Yeah.
versus
That's a really good point.
the opposite, right? Is when you have that skill base, and you know better than me, when you have these skills, and you know how to, your reaction to someone else's offense is second nature. This guy's
Yeah.
about to, Kimura me. I know exactly what to do. You're not necessarily consciously thinking your way through these defenses or reversals or whatever. You're allowing them to happen because you've trained those skills and those situations so much, versus like, oh God, he's about to, wrap me up. I'm just going to get stiff
Right.
as a board and fight it with all my physical strength. You just can't do it that way. And I think that's going to lend itself to becoming more natural. Do you know who Ethan Reeve is by any chance? Really, really well-known strength and conditioning coach. He was at Ohio State for years and then
No.
Wake Forest. So he was a wrestler
Uh-uh.
back in like the Dan Gable area. And the
Oh,
favorite
wow.
thing
Yeah.
he ever told me was, he's like, he wrestled Dan Gable, and he was like, when Dan put his hand on your shoulder, it felt like it weighed 200 pounds. And I was like, that's the coolest thing I've ever heard in my life. But
Yeah.
that's not the point of my story. The point is he told me that his workout as a wrestler was, he would weigh himself that day, whatever he weighed, he'd put that much weight on a barbell, and he would do 10 sets of 10 chin-ups and 10 power cleans. That was his wrestling
Wow.
workout. I'm like, that's bananas. Like, I can't even imagine doing that right now. Of course, I mean, he didn't weigh as much as I do, but at the same time, like, it can really be that simple. Like, that is an
Yeah.
incredible workout for any grappling sport. Like, think about just the grip work alone.
Well,
Not to mention the
you mentioned
conditioning.
in the book, you talk about, and I hope I don't butcher this term, but um, s- competence. There was a big section about competence, right, and how toughness is partially made up of this competent ability, right? Is your proficiency in being capable is part
Yeah.
of what makes us tough. But there was, is it sub? You can correct me here, but subconscious competence or like autonomic competence. There's one
The,
that's like, what is it?
unconscious competence is basically like where you want to get, where like the example I was
Thank
given
you.
of
Yep.
you defending, someone's attempt to tap you out.
Right.
When you reach true proficiency, you are reacting to that without conscious thought, right? The step
Yes.
below that is conscious competence, where you know how to defend it, but you have to kind of think your way through it
Right.
consciously. Like, okay, step one, I'm going to grab his wrist, overhand, and I'm going to rotate him, drive my hip here, whatever, versus it just happening. Like, so
Right.
like the way you and I are speaking English right now, that's unconscious competence. We can just do that. If I try to
Right.
speak to Spanish in someone, I'm like working out the sentences in my head first. So
Right.
like
The
I can get the
conjugation.
idea across, but I have to consciously think my way through it, and it's still half
And
wrong
that,
anyway.
so that idea of subconscious competence is when you're making decisions about what you should or shouldn't do for a sport, that should kind of be the end goal. And this was something that I struggled with when I got into jiu-jitsu 5 years ago, and I was competing in Olympic weightlifting, was I wanted both worlds so bad. And
Yeah.
I was giving up advancing in both of them actually as a result of that, because I was overly selected in my exercises for the sport that I was doing. And then I was under recovered from the sport that I was doing to pursue the training efforts that I wanted.
Right.
And it wasn't until, like a year or two into that I learned, like, look, you have to be really efficient, cut out all the fluff, make it simple, and allow yourself to recover. And it turned out to be, basically if I wanted to train jiu-jitsu 4 days a week, I could not train effectively more than twice a week. And those days were very unsexy. It was my least
Yeah.
favorite beginning to weightlifting that I had ever had, because I had to get rid of all the stuff that was fun, that I loved, that was challenging, and replace it with things that you just said,
Yep.
the exercises that you mentioned, because those are what work. And when you're
Yeah.
trying to be efficient at a sport, you don't have the luxury of doing things that don't work for what you're doing. When you started to create content for this, like, I'll use the tactical games as the overarching theme here, because it's something that you participated in. You can understand all the different facets of like training for this sport, the ability to shoot and perform under pressure, the physical demands for that. How did that sift through these, like, this huge library of exercise selection that you have, and the desire to be strong, to be powerful, to perform, up against the level of stress that you're trying to replicate in that type of an environment, to put yourself under stress and then perform in a very tactical, functional, ultimately like survivalist approach? How did you arrive on your programming structure for that, and your selection of all these exercises that best served you in really what's, aside from the battlefield, the most stressful replication of that?
It was certainly an evolution. And, the when I first started competing in it, my strength was absolutely an advantage over other people. That kind of like got me through all the limitations I had. I was not a great shooter.
Mm-hmm.
My endurance was god awful at that point. I was still weighing 225 pounds or something, and sitting there doing a full kit, like 4 mile trail run on the first one. It's like, God, this is so stupid.
Yeah.
But so when I started learning how to train for it, I'm still approaching it ultimately as a weightlifter, right? So I look at
Mm-hmm.
weightlifting and the strength thing in basically every training program. That's the skeleton, right? That's kind of like my
Right.
foundation. And then from there, we're going to build up or branch out, however you want to look at it. And so that's how I start, right? Well, I'm going to have one day where I'm leg focused. I'm going to do some squats or single leg stuff. I'm going to have a pulling, basic barbell pulling day. I'm going to have, I had to keep Olympic lifts in there, not specifically so much for the sport, but because that's my career and I have to be able to demonstrate those things at some
Right.
level, at least for now, until I hire a full time model or something. Um,
Right. Lose all
it,
control of your endeavor.
but it also came in handy. We would, or especially in the first couple years, there would be, these axle bars, or a lot of them were just farmer handles bars. So people were like hitting
Yep.
themselves in the teeth with the handles and stuff. It was actually kind of funny. Um, and these guys, well, I mean, like I would watch these guys like just struggle for 2 minutes to try to get this thing up, on their belly, on their plate carrier, then up on their chest, and try to get it overhead. And I would literally just bend over and muscle snatch it and start going. And people would be like, what the hell? And of course, now all the guys in the elite division do that. They all figured it out. But
Right.
it was stuff like that they hadn't come across yet, and I had in my back pocket. And I can't compete in that anymore. I'm too injured. But also I can't keep up with them now because they figured out all my secrets, but I never invested the time into getting really good at shooting. So now they have both and I have none like of the advantages. Uh, but so I look at the strength as kind of the skeleton, and then you figure out, okay, well, what are the qualities I need? I need really strong grip, but I also need incredible grip stamina. I need to be able to, do legless
Right.
rope climbs with a bunch of extra weight. I need to be able to do farmer's carriers for literally like 600 yards sometimes. I need to be able to drag sleds. I need to be able to ruck. Like the first national championships, there was a 12-mile, 40-pound ruck. That was one of 9
As
events or
part
something
of
like that.
as part of the
Yeah,
event.
that was the last
Oh my
event of the
god.
first day, and I was like,
Jeez.
awesome. Luckily, it was in
Yeah.
Florida, so there's zero hills. But uh,
Yeah.
so it's you just figure out, what does the sport require? What what of those traits do I already possess, and what do I not have? So the basic thing of all programming is that you exploit your strengths and you strengthen your weaknesses, right? So you don't
Mm.
want to bring your strengths down to the level of your weaknesses. You want to bring your weaknesses up to the level of your strengths and use those strengths as much as you can. So again, I use my
Right.
strength literally was strength in those early days, and I used that to my advantage with big sandbags. I remember the first time, North Carolina was the first year, my third tactical games, the first time they brought out a big sandbag. And it was 150
Yeah.
pounds, and people were losing their minds. Like, there were people who actually quit and just left on that first day. And I was like, well, this is not going to be fun, but like, it's not going to be that much of a problem.
Yeah.
And so it was like, in the way the sport evolved, the things got heavier and heavier and heavier. And so all the guys figured out, I need to get strong. I can't just be good at running and shooting, which is what a lot of the guys
Right.
who were originally coming into it were. That was what they were good at. They had great endurance, but they didn't have the strength. And now those guys are just absolute monsters. Um, they can do it
How
all.
would you say that they compare um, to like a CrossFitter? Obviously, the kit is an X factor here. I mean, you're adding a significant amount of fixed weight that doesn't move the way that you want it to, right? Things are
Yeah.
hanging and they're dangling and they're tight. But I mean, from special forces people I've talked to, friends that I train with that are also involved in military, I kind of think of like the special forces soldier in the battlefield as like the ultimate test, that it's everything together that the modern world has to offer, right? Because you're the addition of firearms, but it's your mental acuity, your endurance, your ability to act in a high pressure situation, your ability to shoot and be a marksman under pressure, all these kind of things. The ultimate survival moment is someone in the battlefield. And so I guess I kind of always thought before it was like CrossFit, until I found the tactical games via you
Mhm.
and following along with everything that you put out. And I was like, wow, this kind of is actually like what I kind of wanted CrossFit to always be, because it tests that extra little bit. It's like that
Yeah.
other X factor that's never present. Now, if you threw in some sort of like kitted wrestling match in the middle of it, then you really have the whole
Right.
package. But
Bring out the pugil
how do you
sticks.
feel
Yeah.
like those? Yeah, how do they compare? Tactical games, efforts, outputs, training, CrossFit games, effort, output,
It,
training.
especially now, the way the sport has evolved, I would say they're very similar in terms of the physical demands and the abilities that you need to be successful. Um,
Yeah.
I would say certainly there are a lot more kind of specialized CrossFit exercises and movements. Like, you're not going to see 30 snatches on a barbell in a tactical games ever.
Right.
I wish I would have done much better, right? But uh, so there's always gonna, you're not going to see like ring muscle ups. So CrossFit very much is still a gym sport, right? There are gym
Mhm.
exercises involved, even though over the years they've branched out and they've done cool stuff, like obstacle courses, and they've done more
Right.
kind of strongman esque. With the big sandbags they started bringing out, and the rogue building these crazy, the pig or whatever they call it, the basically a simulated tire flip, like all these different things.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah.
they're branching out, which is great. I think it's the best thing they could do for the sport instead of it just being exercises. But so the tactical games will always be a little more niche in that sense, where it's not going to have quite as
Mhm.
broad of an array. But I think you have, very similar physical demands. So someone who is very good at CrossFit, is probably going to do well, at least physically, in the tactical games. Where things fall apart is the shooting and the mental acuity and the strategy and that sort of part. And of
Right.
course, that was always the shooting was my weakness because I was never a gun guy, and I had to completely learn that from the start. But I think that's what drew me to it so much is it was you have all the physical elements that I loved, that challenge, and it was a different type of physical demand than I had been doing for the past 15 plus years. So that was
Right.
enjoyable to me. But then it was like, okay, on top of this, there's this incredibly fine skill that you have to do very well while absolutely exhausted. Like you're out there just blowing bubbles, and then you're trying to, take a 50-yard pistol shot, maybe with a
Yeah.
sandbag on one shoulder, and you just finished climbing, a rock wall across in a net, and your trigger finger literally is frozen. There was one event I remember my trigger finger completely froze because my grip was so fried, and I actually got my hand in a way that I could pull the trigger with my middle finger. It was the weirdest experience in my life. Like a finger was frozen.
Adaptive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so it's like stuff like that where it's like, okay, how do you, in a moment like that where you're borderline panicking because it's not working the way, you're super exhausted. There's all these other guys. You hear their shoot cadence. You don't know if they're hitting anything. For all you know, they're shooting the dirt, but that's still
Right.
putting pressure on you to hurry up. Do you have the presence of mind, the composure to kind of take all that stuff and produce the result that you want? And so that was what was really appealing to me, as much as I was like just a total mess as a shooter relative to everybody else. But I learned to do it well enough and had enough of the physical skill to get by. And like I qualified for the nationals every year. There was one. I did okay in the elite division, and it was like it was one of those things where I just had a head start because of the physical side, and then once everybody
Mhm.
figured out what I came in knowing, it was like, game over for me.
I think.
I
I mean,
can't
this
keep
is
up now.
one of the reasons to pursue strength. I forget in Tim Ferriss's book, Tribe of Mentors. I think it was. He was talking about this example that an old strength coach gave him about it. There's a fire in a building, and you have an Olympic weightlifter and you have a marathon runner. Who do you want to send up to the top to get people to bring them down? And like the marathon, although they have the endurance, like they're just not going to be able to do the task. And
Right.
the stronger, the Olympic lifter, might not have the endurance, but they can overcome that to some degree. And the strength is that prerequisite that is the divider between the two. I do want to be very respectful of your time, but there's something important that I wanted to talk about the book that I think you hinted at so well, and you have had the unique opportunity of training so many high performing female athletes in Olympic weightlifting. And when you talk about toughness, and especially before reading the book, I just associated toughness with masculinity, to be fair. It was just this thing that in my head that kind of happened. I think of my dad as being tough, and I just never really, it's not that I didn't think that women were tough. I just hadn't thought about it, and your book
Yeah.
made me think about it. And it's something that I loved about it because it painted the picture of toughness as being this characteristic that isn't confined to a specific type of person or a gender of a person. And I was hoping that you could just also expand on that a little bit with your experience of training such badass, competent, capable, tough females in an extremely demanding sport that, again, unless you've done it, I don't think that people understand how much it wears your body down. Um, so your thoughts on toughness and gender, and what led you to set out to actually make that a point about this book, that this is something that applies to everyone.
Yeah, and so this is this is one of those things where it's like every editor is going to say know your audience. And when
Mhm.
they say what's your audience, the response they will be maddest at is everyone. And
Right.
that was my audience for this book, right? And so it's like the editor's nightmare. It's like, who's this book for? Everyone. And I say that facetiously, but it was really true because I do believe, and the whole point of that book is toughness is this very clear collection of traits that anybody who is motivated to do so can build, acquire, develop, otherwise attain to some degree, right? So it's like anything in life. Some people are going to be better at it than others, but everybody can move that needle, right? And so you look at, yes, I've overwhelmingly coached women my whole career. Most of that is organic. Some of it is by choice. Um, but what it makes very clear is that these qualities, not that I really needed to be told this, but these qualities are very much unrelated to gender, right? They are related to somebody's sense of purpose, somebody's character, all these things again, which are totally independent of gender, and the gender associations we have are more a matter of convention and history, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you can remove people from those constraints and allow them to be free to kind of pursue what they want to pursue, there's no limitation. So going back to like the firefighter or the fire example, one
Right.
of my good friends is a female. She's a firefighter. She's a like really great welder, fabricator, and she always jokes with me. Is like, I need to come up and visit again. Like, we need to have man camp, and you can show me how to do all these man stuff. So I'm like, you do as
Like, you
much
tell
man
me.
stuff as me, and arguably more. Like, you
Yeah.
show me. Like, my welding is I weld like Stevie Wonder. I was like, you teach me this stuff. But so it's just funny to me is when you take someone and you kind of you take that whether real or perceived constraints away from them, they're free to pursue these things in the same way as anybody else. There's no limit. So
Yeah.
there's going to be differences. Like the average woman is never going to be as strong as the average man, even with the same training. But there are a
Right.
lot of women out there who are way stronger than a lot of men. So there are all these different things where might be on average better at certain things than women on average, and women are going to be better at certain things than men on average. When I worked on the ambulance, I used to dispatch also to pick up extra shifts. Um, and we always joked that women were better dispatchers because the guys, the moment we had more than one call simultaneously, we would be in
Couldn't
full
do it.
blown panic. And the women
Yeah.
would just be sitting there like running three different calls at one time, reading a book, they like calm and composed. And so there are certain things I think that do tend to be more natural in either sex. But again, strengthen your weaknesses and exploit your strengths. And in
Yeah.
totality, those things are all going to allow you to achieve greater and greater toughness, which is like this aggregate of all these abilities and qualities. And so I do think it's important to point that out because I didn't want to make the classic, um, self help toughness book and make it seem like it was all about masculinity because it's
Right.
tired and boring and silly and uh, I don't want to go too far with that point, but like
I'm with you, brother.
anytime I see the word alpha male, I feel
Oh my
nauseous. Like
God.
it's just so silly. Like alpha males are not reading what you just wrote about alpha males. They're busy just living their
Yeah.
lives, being competent and having a sense of purpose and meaning and all this stuff. And the same thing is true for the female counterparts, right? Is they know what they're doing. They know what they are pursuing and why. They have the character and the values to back it up. And so I'm just rambling at this point, but it's a frustrating
Well,
topic
no,
to say the least.
it's one of the reasons that I wanted to make a point about this, and I really appreciate it about this book because I couldn't align with you more on this. Surprise, surprise. Uh, in hearing you talk about this, as like, to be fair, like I felt ashamed actually reading it. I was like, wow, I'm 35 years old. I never thought about this term as being like a something that applies to everyone. That I felt actually bad about that, and this book
But see,
made me
that's a
think
sign of
about
good
that.
character that you actually felt bad about thinking that way.
And it did. It was like you never know what you're going to get when you, it's one of the reasons I love reading so much. You never know what you're going to get out of something you read. And the last thing that I expected reading a book about toughness was that I was going to gain perspective on how much this applies to everyone and how much people have the freedom to seek it. Like toughness isn't just whooping people's ass all the time. In fact,
Right.
most cases that's weakness, right? That's
Yeah.
insecurity pouring out of you from all the years of your life was shit or whatever, or people mistreated you. But the toughness can be something that isn't unattainable for everyone, is actually a really
Yeah.
powerful thing, because there's people that do need that wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
And it made me think, I had looked up to in martial arts, right? Like Ronda Rousey getting into the UFC and paving the way for female fighters, and then just how much of that is a part of their whole business and the company, and how many other females all over the world are impacted by this and take up martial arts, learn how to stick up for themselves. I always appreciated that, but I never looked at it through the lens that I now look at it as after reading this. So that's like part of this book that I just didn't really think I was going to walk away with, that hit me kind of square between the eyes. And I was like, this is something that people need to know. You can be, toughness can be achieved and it can be pursued, and it is embodied by people of all walks of life in different areas. And so it does hit for everyone. And that was,
Yeah.
it was a humbling moment in reading it that I really do appreciate that you went out of your way to put that in there. And you did it in a way that, I don't know, if someone can walk away after reading the book and feel like you were wrong about that, best of luck to them. But
Yeah. Well, and it's very clear who and why would think that, and it's unfortunate, but it's not surprising. And so yeah, you definitely need to have an open
yeah,
mind about certain things, but I don't feel like there's anything particularly controversial in that book. That doesn't mean everyone's going to like
no,
it,
I think it's
but they
more
should all
like,
buy it for sure.
right. Yeah, definitely, dude. Absolutely. Especially in independent production. Man, Greg, I knew that this was going to happen. I have a laundry list of things that I didn't even get to look at, to touch. So we'll have to do this again in the future and bring you back. But I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day, sitting down, talking about everything that we had the opportunity to discuss today. And yeah, thank you, man.
Awesome, my pleasure. Thank you for having me on. We'll do it again. We'll follow through.
Absolutely. And maybe we'll talk. We can actually talk about weightlifting, which I thought we
Eh,
would do, but here we are. So
we'll get around to it eventually. What's the rush?
hey, friends, Abe here. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode and sticking around to the very end. If you want to support it, leave a 5-star review on Spotify or check out www.maynideapodcast.com, join the mailing list, and stay up to date on all things The Main Idea, from future guests, sponsorship opportunities, products that I'm using to help me perform at my best, invites to ask me anything, and any upcoming pertinent information to the show. I cannot do this show without you. It is literally why I show up each week and put these episodes together. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, from being part of the community. I hope you have a great day.